Writer's opinion, the fact that this and so many other classic UFO cases have eventually been exposed should instill in us a healthy skepticism that should not be lost in investigating future reports of highly improbable phenomena. As much as I want to believe that these photos are legit, I have to say Class and Schaefer do bring up a lot of good points. It is always most wise to assume that the proof flying object, the researcher said, I think things far that the camera lens could have been referred to directly in his research paper. He proposed that the light source in the east was not actually the sun, but rather a large cloud reflecting the sunlight coming from the west. The shadows do appear to be pretty diffuse, so this is definitely something worth considering. Class and Schaefer's second main point is that some sort of imperfection on the camera lens could have been responsible for the brightness of the UFO's underside. You see, when a smudge is present on a camera lens, it can cause an effect called veiling glare, which basically means that the brightness surrounding an object can basically spill into a darker region of the photo. Class and Schaefer argue that it's far more likely that a smudge is responsible for the bright underside, rather than the object just being far away. It isn't too far-fetched to assume that a camera used on a farm might be a little bit dirty, and it's especially not as big of a stretch as just assuming that there was a giant flying saucer in the sky. Class and Schaefer's findings were enough to convince William Hartman himself to act actually reconsider his analysis, because upon hearing their points, he took his statements back and said, I think Schaefer's work removes Vince William Hartman himself, and it's especially not as big of a stretch as just assuming that there was a giant flying saucer in the sky. Class and Schaefer's findings were enough to convince William Hartman himself to actually reconsider his analysis, because upon hearing their points, he took his statements back and said, I think Schaefer's work removes the McMinnville case from consideration as evidence for the existence of disc-like artificial aircrafts. Despite this, their research wasn't enough to deter all believers, and in response to that, Schaefer had this to say. Of course, this does not prove that the photographs do not show an extraordinary flying object, but it has shown that there is no reason to believe that they do. The non-existence of such objects, as well as that of werewolves, witches, and unicorns, can never be proven. No amount of negative evidence will ever seem conclusive so long as there exists a strong will to believe. In this writer's opinion, the fact that this and so many other classic UFO cases have eventually been exposed should instill in us a healthy skepticism that should not be lost in investigating future reports of highly improbable phenomena. As much as I want to believe that these photos are legit, I have to say Class and Schaefer do bring up a lot of good points. It is always most wise to assume that the least extravagant explanation is probably the correct one, but just assuming still doesn't provide any clear answers. In fact, you may have noticed, but all the researchers so far have been very hesitant to present any conclusion as fact. For a while, there simply wasn't enough information for either side to end the debate for good. However, in recent years, a team of French researchers have put together 2 comprehensive papers that many believe finally answers this mystery. The reason it took this long for any new breakthroughs was because of the progress of technology. There wasn't much else that researchers could use back when William Hartman or Bruce Maccabee was doing their research. But by the time 2013 came around, there was a lot of new tools to use, and technology had come a long way. The majority of the research done by these French researchers, Antoine, Francois, and Jeff, was thanks to the analytical computer software IPACO. They used this software to calculate the sizes and distances with more accuracy than Maccabee's estimations. According to its geometric analysis of the photos, the variation in distance between the UFO and the lower wire in both pictures is less than 0.4%, which means it's basically identical. This heavily implies that the hanging model theory is true, because these results would be very hard to get with a real flying saucer, especially if it was moving as fast as Paul said it was, because Paul said photos, the variation distances with thanks to way. But by the time 2013 came around, there was a lot of new tools to use, and technology had come a long way. The majority of the research done by these French researchers, Antoine, Francois, and Jeff, was thanks to the analytical computer software IPACO. They used this software to calculate the sizes and distances with more accuracy than Maccabee's estimations. According to its geometric analysis of the photos, the variation in distance between the UFO and the lower wire in both pictures is less than 0.4%, which means it's basically identical. This heavily implies that the hanging model theory is true, because these results would be very hard to get with a real flying saucer, especially if it was moving as fast as Paul said it was, because Paul said that he had to step towards the right a little bit because the UFO had went behind the shed, or it went out of view of the camera, so he had to move to the right to get it back into view. It would just be very, very tricky to get this level of precision and have the pictures be this identical if the object was moving across the sky and Paul was moving physically. Finally, in their second paper, titled Evidence of a Suspension Thread, they used a new feature in the IPACO software to scan all the possible lines of pixels stemming from the top of the UFO across the power line. The software then detects which lines have the least mean value of brightness, and according to them, the software spotted a dark line coming from the UFO at about a negative 11-degree tilt in both pictures. And with that, they concluded by saying, the clear result of this study was that the McMinnville UFO was a model hanging from a thread. The low values of the tilt angles between the suspension thread and the verticals of both McMinnville photos are quite compatible with the presence of a soft wind on the site and with the hypothesis of a rather light suspended object. At last, everything leading up to this point, including the time of day discrepancy, the conveniently placed wires, and now the clear suspension thread, culminated in laying the case to rest once and for all. Except, as simple as it would be to do that, I would argue that it isn't completely finished. For starters, the For starters, the researchers explicitly stated that the technique they used requires the area that's being analyzed to be completely uniform and consistent, which the sky in these scans just isn't. There are imperfections scattered all across the sky, including scratches, fingerprints, and splotches. Of course, I'm not exactly saying that the dark lines are caused by a scratch, because then the same scratch would have to be present in both images. Instead, I'm simply suggesting that maybe we shouldn't be so quick to trust these calculations when the sky appears to be so inconsistent. It is certainly worth questioning why this dark line, is present in both images, but it's also worth questioning why it appears to be so tilted. They said negative 11 degrees was a slight tilt, but it really isn't. The wind would have to be pushing pretty hard, and it would have to be pushing very consistently. Wind isn't exactly, predictable or consistent, so it would be kind of strange if it had the exact same tilt in both images, which it does. If the wind really was responsible for such a great tilt, it wouldn't have been consistent across both images, in my opinion. Just to top it all off, the scientific software that they used to do their research was created completely by them with the sole purpose of debunking UFO photos. It isn't like open source or free to the public to use either. If you want to use it, it's locked behind a paywall, and on top of that, you have to get their individual permission to use it before they can even send you a key. And I couldn't find any outside sources to verify the accuracy of the software's calculations, so all we really have to base it off of is their crappy website. If the software was made by a third party or even supported by anyone other than these researchers, I would say that this case is closed. However, for these reasons, there are certainly many things to consider before we trust the study as irrefutable evidence. I will say that if we can trust the IPACO team's findings, if we could trust them, I would say they make really strong arguments, and it's no question why most people were okay leaving it at this. Not everyone agreed that this was conclusive. Bruce Maccabee still stood his ground and believed that the photos were genuine, but the majority of people were satisfied with this conclusion, combined with all the other skeptical points that were brought up in the past. And so as time went on, even the most niche UFO communities lost interest in this mystery, and this is basically where the mystery has died. Paul and Evelyn Trent both sadly passed away in the late 90s. They insisted that they were telling the truth about the photos for their whole life, even up to their last days. If this was some kind of hoax, then they had to be insanely committed. They also on several occasions expressed the grief and trouble they went through as a result of their unexpected popularity. From interrogation and manipulation to losing their photos for years on end, only for the media to profit off of them. The Trents really went through a lot of pain that they didn't ask for. We should remember them for their honesty and resilience. Although the mystery may have died, its spirit can still be felt in the many effects it had on the world of UFOs and pop culture. With the intention of keeping the legacy alive, a UFO festival in McMinnville has been held every year, honoring the mystery and bringing like-minded people together. I was actually fortunate enough to visit the UFO festival myself and see what it was all about. And I'll be honest, I was expecting to see a lot of people wearing tinfoil hats and talking about conspiracy theories, but what I saw was actually very different. Don't get me wrong, there were still plenty of tinfoil hats, but it was clear that most people were there either for the food, the music, or the costumes, stuff like that, which is wonderful on its own. It's good to see people gathering around and having fun together. Unfortunately, that seemed to be the only reason that anyone was there. I got the feeling that nobody there really knew about the Trent photos that had actually started the festival in the first place. I guess it was just kind of sad to see this festival that was meant to keep this piece of history and this UFO mystery alive just kind of turn into a Keep Oregon Weird type tourist attraction, because I really do believe that there is an interesting story here that is worth talking about still to this day, if not for just the sake of mystery, then for the sake of the Trents, who for their whole lives up until the days that they passed away, claimed to be telling the truth. Overall, the festival was a nice experience, and the highlight of my visit was definitely when I accidentally stumbled across the News Register where the McMinnville Photos publication all started. It was so surreal to suddenly be right in front of this location that I had read about in all these papers written in the 60s. Without this very business, this mystery would not have left Register where the McMinnville Photos publication all started. Now let's talk about the nature of the photos and my personal thoughts. It's no question that the quality of these pictures isn't great. This can be even further proven when you look at something like the Life magazine photos, which were professionally taken in the same location. In the high quality images, depth is a lot less ambiguous, and you can tell exactly where each mountain is in the distance, whereas in the Trent photos, the camera quality is so low that the distant hills just kind of blend into each other. Obviously, something like this would make it harder to determine where the object is in physical space. I'd argue that given just how much division these pictures have caused, it could be just impossible to come up with any sort of clear answer because of the image quality. If we can't rely on physical analysis of the images, we have to then take into account the eyewitness accounts. And at this point, we know what the Trents claim to have seen. It's just the main question is, were they telling the truth? From considering everything that I've read, I personally don't believe that the Trents seem like they would ever purposely deceive anyone or come up with a hoax like this. Not only do they seem like they wouldn't do that, but they also just had no reason to. This is the main reason why I don't feel satisfied picking either side. On one hand, it's a ridiculous concept. A flying saucer flew directly over their house, and they managed to get pictures of it, but no one else in the area saw it. But on the other hand, this mystery has refused to be solved for such a long time, it makes you wonder if maybe there's a reason for that. The Trents were ordinary, humble farmers that very well could have just been at the right place at the right time. If these pictures are fake, then the McMinnville photos have to be, without question, the best UFO hoax photos to ever be made, especially when they came out at a time when most fake UFO photos looked like this. And if these photos are genuine, then they have to be some of the most remarkable, especially when they came out at a time when most fake UFO photos looked like this. And if these photos are genuine, then they have to be some of the most remarkable photos ever taken. Either way, that makes these two photographs incredibly important and worth discussing for years to come. As people, we are all looking for something to believe in. Whether it's religion, politics, or in some cases aliens, we all have something that we use to attach meaning to our lives. We are all looking for some photos ever taken. Either way, that makes these two photographs incredibly important and worth discussing for years to come. As people, we are all looking for something to believe in. Whether it's religion, politics, or in some cases aliens, we all have something that we use to attach meaning to our lives. To believe in the McMinnville photos also means to believe in the Trents. It means to believe that these ordinary people stood their ground in the face of endless criticism and manipulation, all for the sake of honesty. This has less to do with believing in aliens and more to do with believing in each other. And for this reason, all I can say is that I want to believe, and you should too.
Hey guys, this video is sponsored by Nvidia and MSI, so stick around. Vastly different from the last one, and the opinions from fans also different greatly. It's software series, I don't think you're going to find a more divisive Nvidia and MSI, so stick around until the end to find out more about the GeForce RTX 30 series laptops. When it comes to the Quake series, I don't think you're going to find a more divisive bunch of games, with each entry being vastly different from the last one, and the opinions from fans also different laptops. When it comes to the Quake series, I don't think you're going to find a more divisive bunch of games, with each entry being vastly different from the last one, and the GeForce RTX 30 series laptops. When it comes to the Quake series, I don't think you're going to find a more divisive bunch of games, with each entry being vastly different from the last one, and the opinions from fans also differing greatly. id Software's first entry in the iconic franchise was a challenging, violent, fast-paced shooter that in some ways kind of felt like a natural progression from Doom. Replacing demons in a portal to hell with monsters and Lovecraftian entities split across different dimensional gates. The action shifted from 2D sprites to fully 3D models and also included mouse look, jumping, much more elaborate environments, not to mention the leap from MIDI to CD music. And after playing this, you'd really be foaming at the mouth to play a sequel, wouldn't you? Which is kind of what happened back in 1997 when id Software followed it up with Quake 2. Now, I can't think of a single person I knew who didn't like this game when it came out, and yet despite that, over the years it's gotten this weird, undeserved reputation as being a bad game or something, which I'd argue is said by mostly people on Twitter who weren't even alive when it came out, or are just parroting that opinion from someone else. And it's always kind of been funny to me how Quake 2 is so disliked for being so different to the first one, and yet Quake 3, which easily has the least in common with the first game, seems to get a free pass. If anything, you'd think it'd be more popular now, especially after Doom Eternal, simply because Quake 2 was the first game that Marty Stratton worked on. Yeah, you know, the same Marty Stratton who, along with Hugo Martin, we've got primarily to thank for Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal.
Thank you.
Either way, though, I've always thought that Quake 2 was a really solid sequel, and that's a hill that I'll gladly die on any day of the goddamn week. I've always thought that Quake 2 was a really solid sequel, and that's a hill that I'll gladly die on any day of the goddamn week. I feel people who simply hate on it for not sharing enough similarities with the first game, or for more even inane reasons like the lack of a muzzle flash, need to reevaluate what they think makes a game good or bad. Now, I'll be honest, the real reason I wanted to make this video was to talk about the ports for Quake 2, the one on the Nintendo bad. Now, I'll be honest, the real reason I wanted to make this video was to talk about the ports for Quake 2, the one on the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation. But to first understand why those are so impressive, let's get a few things clear about the base game. You know, before Night Dive Studios remaster it and everyone suddenly becomes a fan. Right, so released way back in the game. You know, before Night Dive Studios remaster it and everyone suddenly becomes a fan. Right, so released way back in 1997, it's probably no secret that Quake 2 wasn't even originally supposed to be a Quake game. And that kind of makes sense given the all-new setting and premise. The gothic, medieval, and fantasy-like environments of Quake were replaced with industrial and utilitarian locations on the alien planet of Strogos. Factories, warehouses, buildings, and structures. Right, so released way back in 1997, it's probably no secret that Quake 2 wasn't even originally supposed to be a Quake game. And that kind of makes sense given the all-new setting and premise. The gothic, medieval, and fantasy-like environments of Quake were replaced with industrial and utilitarian locations on the alien planet of Strogos. Factories, warehouses, buildings, and structures that were fully automated, with moving platforms, elevators, and machinery, leaving the player feeling like a small piece of meat moving across that metaphorical production line. Like a starship trooper being sent to the planet of Klendathu to take on the bugs, you're fighting back against a malevolent cybernetic alien race intent on taking over the entire galaxy. And in typical id Software protagonist fashion, you're just a lowly grunt, one of many fighting back against the Strog and moving around the inner workings of the planet like a mouse behind drywall, eventually making your way to the palace and even defeating their leader. Which also then went on to set up the events in Quake 4, and I think this might be the only Quake game to ever actually set up a sequel. And along with events in Quake 4 and defeating their leader. Which also then went on to set up the events in Quake 4, and I think this might be the only Quake game to ever actually set up a sequel. And along with Half-Life and Unreal, it's one of those early shooters that strayed away from the level-to-level format and instead had you completing objectives and working towards goals. In a lot of ways, I think you can almost look at this as a very early example of the military shooter format that became much and working towards goals. Unreal, it's one of those early shooters that strayed away from the level-to-level format and instead had you completing objectives and working towards goals. In a lot of ways, I think you can almost look at this as a very early example of the military shooter format that became much bigger in the mid-2000s. You know, where in those ones you'd always end up becoming the one-man army responsible for saving the day. Quake 2, where in those ones you'd always end up becoming the one-man army responsible for saving the day. Quake 2 really marks that turning point where shooters were now having actual campaigns. They were putting you in the middle of a much more fleshed out and detailed location and giving you an actual purpose, instead of just running around and looking for the end of a switch. It's also funny too how the other shooters on the same engine also helped to do the same thing, you know, if you really stop to think about it. Soldier of Fortune, Kingpin, Sin, and yes, even Daikatana all had campaigns with an overarching storyline, with different characters, scenes of dialogue, and changing goals.
I'm prepared to scour Earth for this motherfucker.
With an overarching storyline. Soldier of Fortune, Kingpin, Funny too how the other shooters on the same engine also help to do the same thing, you know, if you really stop to think about it. Soldier, Fortune, Kingpin, Sin, and yes, even Daikatana all had campaigns with an overarching storyline, with different characters, scenes of dialogue, and changing goals.
I'm prepared to scour the earth for this motherfucker.
Quake 2, though, is really one of the first examples of this, and I think along with Unreal and Half-Life, it helped to lay the foundation for these style of shooters moving ahead. This meant you'd often have to run back and forth across different maps, often multiple times. And yeah, I mean, I guess on some level I can understand how the extra brain power required to remember something as basic as where to put a keycard could be deemed as challenging. Plus, it's also one of the first games, I think, to really popularize the railgun in shooters. And if there's one thing that we should be thankful for first-person shooters giving us, aside from shotguns and giblets, it's definitely railguns. Visually, the Quake 2 engine looked and sounded amazing at the time, allowing for much more detailed maps and modelling for enemies and weapons. You could even damage enemies over time, seeing them become more bloodied and injured the more damage they took. I also think it's a game that you have to play with the texture filtering off. I mean, there's something about the smoother look of texture filtering here that just makes the game feel less grungy. That also goes hand in hand with the music, which is just incredible, composed by Sonic Mayhem. There's a heap of awesome tracks in this thing with these shredding guitar riffs. Also goes hand in hand with filtering off. I mean, there's some talk. I also think it's a game that you have to play with the texture filtering off. I mean, there's something about the smoother look of texture filtering here that just makes the game feel less grungy. That also goes hand in hand with the music, which is just incredible, composed by Sonic Mayhem. There's a heap of awesome tracks in this thing with these shredding guitar riffs to really get you amped up. And I think their undisputed masterpiece here is Descent into Cerberon. A song so catchy that most people don't even listen to the lyrics, but they should. Quake 1's soundtrack immersed you into the environment, whereas Quake 2's immersed you into the role of a badass. And while both of them are good, it is kind of funny how people are going to suck Trent Reznor's dick until their tongue is swollen, but you'll never hear those same people praising Sonic Mayhem. In fact, they'd even argue that it holds up against the stuff that Bobby Prince worked on in the original Doom. And if you ever need a more perfect example of how different in tone Quake 2 is from the first game, well then just put these soundtracks side by side. Now, I said earlier how I thought that Quake was an evolution of Doom's mechanics. Well, in that way too, I think you can look at Quake 2 being an evolution of Quake 1's. I mean, let's look at the basic stats, right? The first game had roughly 15 or so enemies, whereas Quake 2 has upwards of 20. The Light Guard and the Enforcers are really the carryover from the Grunts in Quake 1. They're weak, lowly ranked enemies that are easy enough to deal with, but can be dangerous in high numbers. And now there's different variants that can carry different weapons. Gunners are an evolution of the Ogres, where instead of firing a single grenade, now these guys are able to fire off 4 in rapid succession, along with having a minigun as backup instead of a chainsaw. Also, if you're playing on a higher difficulty, the chances are you're going to see them avoiding incoming attacks. Instead of just one aerial enemy in the form of those annoying fucking scrags, Quake 2 on the other hand now has 3 of them, 4 if you include one of the bosses. Plus the enemies are just a lot different in design from the first game. Now you've got these horrific looking mechanical monstrosities, the formed amalgamations of flesh and steel. If you ever stop to really check out the texture work on these creatures, it's pretty cool stuff. A really underappreciated example of good body horror that they really built upon in Quake 4. You also get all these hints of the kind of creatures that they fused with, from mechanical to even reptilian. A lot of these enemies now also prefer to attack you from range compared to the monsters in Quake who would often just beeline straight towards you, often making explosive weapons and splash damage a serious threat. I mean, with the rocket launcher in the first game, you were pretty much just signing your own death warrant at times. And on that note, if you want to talk about the natural progressions even further, well, then there's no better example than the differences in the weapons. Starting with the rocket launcher in the first game, beeline straight towards you, often you from range compared to the monsters in Quake who would often just beeline straight towards you, often making explosive weapons and splash damage a serious threat. I mean, with the rocket launcher in the first game, you were pretty much just signing your own death warrant at times. And on that note, if you want to talk about the natural progressions even further, well, then there's no better example than the differences in the weapons. Starting off with the blaster, a weapon that is so fucking useless it doesn't even really function as a portable light source. I'm still on the fence though as to whether or not it's as bad as Quake's axe. I mean, that thing couldn't even chop up a piece of soft cheese. I think the blaster wins simply because it's ranged, but either way they sure made sure they nailed the feeling of your fallback weapon being about as effective as a warm stream of piss. After that, you've got a shotgun and a super shotgun, with the super shotgun, again, pretty much trumping the basic one completely, making it almost redundant. I want to say too that we also need more weapons in games to have handles on the top of them. It just makes the super shotgun look so effective and reliable. It looks like I could take this thing out all day and use it to hammer down railroad spikes, and then use it to kill things, and it'd still hit dead on center every time. Instead of the nail guns, you've got a machine gun and a chain gun, and both of these are actually kind of useful in different situations. The machine gun's handy for just peppering the weaker enemies with a constant stream of bullets, plus there's something I've always loved about its understated sound effect when firing. Do you know what I mean? It's like this weapon has no pretensions about what it's put here to do. situations. You've got a machine gun and a chain gun, and both of these are actually kind of useful in different situations. The machine gun's handy for just peppering the weaker enemies with a constant stream of bullets, plus there's something I've always loved about its understated sound effect when firing. Do you know what I mean? It's like this weapon has no pretensions about what it's put here to do. Plus it might be one of the first FPS weapons I can remember that had any kind of simulated recoil. Then the chain gun is just good for killing whatever's on the other end of the barrel as quickly as possible. It's about the closest I've ever gotten to feeling like the T-800 at the end of Terminator 2. And the short stints you can fire this thing full auto without restraint is the stuff that boners are made of.
I wrote a blog post a while ago about why I f***ing hate video games. Because this is what it does. It appeals to like the male fantasy.
The grenade launcher and the rocket launcher, again staples of the Quake series, both make a return here, and the slower firing speed of the projectiles now makes them much more skill-based, and less just about spamming them like crazy. Plus, I've always loved how this is like the only game in the entire series that has polygonal explosions. Why no one else has ever done this is anyone's guess. Instead of the Thunderbolt from Quake, you've got the Hyper Blaster, which is more or less just the plasma rifle from Doom. It's even got that slight delay before you can fire it again. And of course, they managed to work a BFG into this thing too, if you can find it, which also easily holds its own against the OG from Doom. God damn! In fact, I think this version is actually if you can find it, which also easily holds its own against the OG from Doom. Holds its own against the OG from Doom. God damn! In fact, I think this version is actually closer to the one from Doom Eternal, with a slower moving projectile that fires out these little tendrils that attack nearby enemies. I already mentioned the railgun before, but you know what? It's worth mentioning again, because I don't think it's possible to give this thing too much praise. It's easily one of the best weapons in the game, not to mention one of the best weapons of all time. And the sound this bad boy makes when firing is about as close to the sound of an instant erection as you're ever gonna hear. Oh my god! And again, this might be the first time we ever saw a railgun in an FPS game. I do know that Shadow Warrior had one too, and that both games came out in 1997, so it's kinda hard to know who came up with that idea first. And you know what, outside of the lack of muzzle flash, a complaint which is kinda piss weak considering the multitude of things these weapons do well, I've never quite understood the dislike towards this lineup, considering it's really just the same as the first game, but improved across the board. It just feels like every weapon here has more of a purpose. I mean, while the Super Shotgun is a great weapon for taking out your run-of-the-mill enemies, you're obviously going to find it less useful against someone like the Tank Commanders or some of the more agile flying enemies. I just feel like there's more room for experimentation, compared to Quake 1 where you spent 90% of the time with the Super Shotgun, outside of the other 10% where you either use the Super Nailgun or the Rocket Launcher. One of the criticisms I can get behind though is the flatness of the environments, which does kinda make sense given the premise and the location. I think the colour palette is definitely lacking compared to the first game, and there is a sense of being stuck on this barren shithole rock of a planet. But again, that's really kind of the point. I mean, this ain't a sightseeing tour. And I think any real criticism of the Quake 2 engine is kind of selling the whole thing short. I mean, like I said, this engine really laid the groundwork for some of the best of the old school shooters. Without Quake 2, we wouldn't have had Soldier of Fortune, Kingpin, Sin, or Daikatana.
Son of a gun!
And quite frankly, I don't want to know what life would be like in a world where those games don't exist. Not to mention some of the best mods of all time, with things like Action Quake, without which I'd argue Counter-Strike would never exist. Some of the best mods. I want to know what life would be like in a world where those games don't exist. Not to mention some of the best mods of all time, with things like Action Quake, without which I'd argue Counter-Strike would never exist. Ow! With things like Action Quake, without which I'd argue Counter-Strike would never exist. Ow! So overall I think Quake 2 I'd argue Counter-Strike would never exist. Ow! So overall I think Quake 2 deserves more recognition, and its status as an important entry in the history of the genre is something that just gets way too overlooked. And finally, speaking of overlooked, that brings me to the point of this video.
Finally, motherfucker.
The ports for Quake 2. Now, I've finished Quake 2 more times than I can count, and although I do love it to bits, it's one of those games that's starting to feel way too familiar. So this time when I went for another playthrough, I also thought I'd add the console ports to the list. And it kind of dawned on me that these ports, along with Quake 2 in general, haven't really ever seen all that much love throughout the years. Seems like there's been new versions of Doom coming out every couple of years, and last year Night Dive Studios remastered Quake, but the only real main remasters we've had for Quake 2 outside of unofficial source ports was the Nvidia RTX re-release from a couple of years back. Night Dive Studios remastered Quake, but the only real main remaster of years, and last Quake 2 I thought I'd add the console ports way too familiar. So this time when I went for another playthrough, I also thought I'd add the console ports to the list. And it kind of dawned on me that these ports, along with Quake 2 in general, haven't really ever seen all that much love throughout the years. Seems like there's been new versions of Doom coming out every couple of years, and last year Night Dive Studios remastered Quake, but the only real main remasters we've had for Quake 2 outside of unofficial source ports was the Nvidia RTX re-release from a couple of years back. It's hard to not just see this as a ray tracing tech demo because it really does show off the possibilities and the potential that these older games can have when ray tracing is added with an actual modicum of effort rather than just chucking the feature on a game willy-nilly. But as far as the PC is concerned, I mean, that's about it. What's also kind of weird is that if you bought Quake 4 for the Xbox 360, you know, in which case if you did, we should be friends, you'd probably remember that hidden away on the bonus features disc was a really good remaster of Quake 2. And I think it's safe to say that for a lot of people, especially for those people whose first console was the 360, this would have been their first introduction to the series. I didn't even know this version existed until I started doing research for this video, and I'm flabbergasted, yes, flabbergasted that more people don't know about it. I mean, it not only controls pretty smoothly with that Xbox controller, but it's also one of the first games for the platform to run at 1080 resolution, not to mention at a pretty smooth 60 frames per second. It's actually kind of crazy how good the console ports for Quake games have been. I mean, even with the ports for Quake 3 on the PlayStation 2 and the Dreamcast. I mean, even frames per second. It's actually kind of crazy how good the console ports for Quake games have been. I mean, even with the ports for Quake 3 on the PlayStation 2 and the Dreamcast.
Excellent.
I can only imagine the amount of work that must have gone into bringing this remaster to life, and yet for some reason you hear so few people talking about it, compared to people bitching about Quake 4. Prior to this though, your only way to experience Quake 2 on the consoles was with either the PlayStation or the Nintendo 64. Now, this also wasn't the first time that a Quake game made its way onto a Nintendo console. Way back in 1998, Midway Games took a stab at a Nintendo 64 port for Quake, taking a similar approach to it as they did with Doom 64 a year earlier. That being a completely revamped soundtrack and much more of a focus on the horror-based aspects of Quake's design. For some reason though, this version of the game got really bad reviews, with reviewers often claiming that it was just an inferior port of the PC version, which obviously it is, I mean no shit, but I always found this to be a bit of a weird criticism, because I don't think that this is a version intended for people who had already played it on the PC. I always kind of assumed that this was intended for people who didn't have a PC at the time, so the Nintendo 64 was the only platform they could get it on. And if you look at the whole thing from that perspective, I gotta say I don't see all that much wrong with it. It still controls pretty well with that 64 controller and has more or less the same levels. About all that has working against it is the frame rate, which can be pretty damn crappy at times, plus you're also expected to beat entire levels without dying as there's no manual save options. And that's a bit of an issue because the levels weren't really designed to be finished in a single sitting, and it kind of makes the game a lot tougher than it should be at times. But the new soundtrack, I think, makes things pretty interesting. Not to mention, you've got all that new coloured lighting, which changes the tone of the levels entirely, making them look like something out of a Dario Argento movie. Night Dive Studios even included a mod for this version in their recent Quake remaster, which is just beyond based, and it's all up just astounding in their recent Quake remaster Argento movie. Night Dive Studios even included a mod for this version in their recent Quake remaster, which is just beyond based, levels entirely. Not to mention, you've got all that new coloured lighting, which changes the tone of the levels entirely, making them look like something out of a Dario Argento movie. Night Dive Studios even included a mod for this version in their recent Quake remaster, which is just beyond based, and it's all up just astounding that they got the whole thing running to begin with. So, who better to call on for the Quake 2 port but Midway Games? Which is what happened again in 1999 when they needed someone to port the game across to the Nintendo 64. You can definitely tell it's been worked on by the same people just from that intro movie alone, again showing the game's logo as it's covered in various enemies from the game, all of whom fire their weapons towards the camera. Yeah, where have I seen that before? Then the ending screen once you've beaten the game kind of reminds me of Doom 2, showing this gallery of all the enemies along with their death animations. But now, clench that sphincter and remember that there was also a Quake 2 port for the PlayStation, and to make it even more confusing, this one was developed by a group called Hammerhead. And this I think is where it starts to get interesting, because aside from a few minor similarities, these are both vastly different versions of the same game, to the point that it really is like playing through two entirely separate campaigns. Seems like Midway Games took all that criticism to heart about their Quake port not being unique to the platform, so this time they went right ahead and just made a bunch of all new levels, which comes in considerably shorter than the PC version. Roughly, I think about half the size with only 20 levels compared to 39 on the PC. I mean, you will see some familiar looking areas here and there, but by and large this campaign is completely unique. Also, like Doom and Quake 64, old mate Aubrey Hodges again returns to create an entirely different soundtrack, though for some reason this time under the pseudonym of Ken Razor Richmond. Now look, the only Razor I've ever known is Razor Ramon Sumitani, and I think if that guy ever did the music for a Quake game, it'd definitely be a lot different to this. Overall it does work well, but I'm just not sure if it kind of fits, and there is definitely something missing here without Sonic Mayhem. What's probably most unique about this version though is that the level flow is entirely linear. Unlike the PlayStation 1 and the PC port, you're really just moving through the levels here in a more traditional sense, finding keycards and often objective items before making your way to the end of the level. There still isn't any kind of manual save option, but it does have a really complex password system, much the same as Doom and Quake 64, where the game's able to keep a tally on what level you're up to, along with the weapons you're carrying and your other basic stats. I'm still in awe as to how this thing can be so accurate, and it's a definite godsend if you're lacking a memory pack. There's also a lot of really cool looking environments here. One of the last levels is this giant freight elevator that you're moving through, and it's a pretty impressive visual trick here to make the whole thing seem like it's constantly moving. It's also definitely much more colourful than the PC version. The level set in the mines, for instance, had this bluish hue, which is completely different to how the same environment looks on the PC, where it kind of felt that time like you were taking a tour through Satan's butthole. But it's the final level that's had the biggest change, I think, because now instead of fighting the Macron, you're instead taking on two tank commanders and a Hornet, having to defeat all of them before the exit route becomes available. What's most important though is that Midway Games understood that this game is designed to be played with a controller, which means unlike Quake 64, you don't quite need to aim up and and down so often, with enemies often being on the same level as the player. Most of the enemies are also included too. I think about the only ones missing are the medic and the technicians, which ain't that much of a deal anyway. I mean, both of those things are about as annoying as having a wasp inside your dick hole. I think you only encountered the medics a handful of times in Vanilla Quake, and those technicians were little more than just floating barrels. This sure as shit though doesn't make Quake 2 any easier, and it's still a pretty damn challenging game. More so because you're often having to deal with a pretty choppy frame rate, and yeah, imagine that, a Nintendo 64 game that runs like ass.
Oh, big surprise.
Having said that though, I actually think it's one of the better looking and performing games for the platform. GoldenEye and Perfect Dark have this weird sort of messy, choppy frame rate, and it's barrels. This sure as shit though doesn't make Quake 2 any easier, and it's still a pretty damn challenging game. More so because you're often having to deal with a pretty choppy frame rate, and yeah, imagine that, a Nintendo 64 game that runs like ass.
Oh, big surprise.
Having said that though, I actually think it's one of the better looking and performing games for the platform. GoldenEye and Perfect Dark have this weird sort of messianic status amongst Nintendo fans, despite the fact that both of those games now look and play like utter shit. Quake 2, in comparison, is easily much smoother and has a much sharper image quality. Definitely has areas that perform better than others, but it's a damn sight better than the single-digit performance you'd often get in GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. Being accurate with single-shot weapons like the rocket launcher and the railgun ain't as hard as you'd think it would be, you know, as long as you're not epileptic. And on the plus side, they also managed to add in actual muzzle flash, so there's really not that much to complain about here. I love too how when you're now holding the BFG, you can see the bottom of the player's hands glowing from the radiation coming off the weapon. It's kind of like the briefcase in Pulp Fiction. And yeah, maybe don't hold that thing too close to your nutsack, you know, if you ever want to have kids. Actually, I think it's kind of neat too how this port has this kind of immersive heads-up display, where you can have the HUD fade out if you want to when you're not in combat, you know, to make things more engrossing, I suppose. And you know what, in fairness, playing video games on a CRT television in a dimly not in combat, you know, actually, I think it's kind of neat too how this port has this kind of immersive heads-up display, where you can have the HUD fade out if you want to when you're not in combat, you know, to make things more engrossing, I suppose. And you know what, in fairness, playing video games on a CRT television in a dimly lit room is still way more immersive to me than half the modern day crap that gets pumped out for the Xbox and the PlayStation 5 these days. Overall, it's clearly had a lot more work put into it than the Quake 64 port has, you know, in case the entirely all-new set of levels wasn't a dead giveaway. Plus, like all Nintendo 64 games, it has the option of up to 4-player multiplayer matches, the kind of thing that both created and ended friendships due to screen cheating. And I'll be honest, right, at first I didn't really think too much of this port, but the more time you spend with it, the more you can really appreciate the work that's gone into bringing it to life. From a technical viewpoint, just getting the whole thing running in the first place, but just the way they tried to implement all of these other mechanics to make it feel like its own thing. Then you've got Quake 2 on the PlayStation 1, which is kind of like a weird combination of both. I mean, it sticks to the same level design of the PC version, being objective-based instead of linear, only the environments are mostly just condensed versions of the original. And that, again, my friends, is a pretty phenomenal technical achievement for the console, considering how it barely looked like the PS1 could run Doom at times. Now, this thing right here is the reason to own a PlayStation mouse, and why I say that is if you're trying to play this thing with a controller, you'll see that it really has one of the worst control schemes in any first-person shooter I've played on the platform. Normally, I can find myself getting used to control schemes over time, but this one is just so backwards that even I have my limits. This came out before even Medal of Honor or Alien Resurrection came along and helped to make the thumbstick controls commonplace, so it includes a control scheme that's just downright archaic. So get a load of this, right? The left thumbstick moves you forward and aims left and right, while the right thumbstick strafes left and right and then aims up and down. Now, it might not sound like a huge deal, and it really is a minor difference, but if you think about that layout, I mean, really stop to think about it, it really just makes this thing borderline unplayable. It's kind of like trying to suddenly write with your left hand if you've spent your entire life writing with your right, or, you know, vice versa. And honestly, I don't even think I'd recommend playing this unless you somehow get your hands on a mouse. Yes, that's how bad it feels. With the mouse setup, you can hold the controller in your left hand to move and strafe, and then just aim with the mouse in your right. And yeah, I guess that's also pretty clunky, but it's a damn sight better given the alternatives. Once you get past that though, you'll see that this is again also a really impressive port, and it captures that perfect mix of chunky, wobbly polygons from the PC, combined with that dithering effect that the PlayStation was known for, making the whole thing seem even grunt chunky, wobbly alternatives. Once you get past that though, you'll see that this is again also a really impressive port, and it captures that perfect mix of chunky, wobbly polygons from the PC, combined with that dithering effect that the PlayStation was known for, making the whole thing seem even grungier, which I can really get behind. There's even this new bit in the detention center where one of those poor captured Marines has scrawled "kill me" into the glass wall of his cell, which is just metal as fuck. But more importantly than that though, is that it includes Sonic Mayhem's soundtrack, keeping the game in line with its PC roots. It's grungy, pixelated, and rough around the edges, you know, exactly what you want. You ain't lying. For a game that's set on a hostile planet where you're fighting cybernetic aliens. And there's just something so charming about how it's this massively downgraded version, and yet it still tries to keep up with its more powerful brethren. I don't know, man, something about that just feels so endearing. Now, if you played the PC version, you're again going to see a lot of familiar-looking areas, but they've also managed to include a few new ones as well. For starters, the game now opens with this entirely new series of levels, which are unique to the PlayStation 1. And all up, there's again 20 levels in total, split across 5 missions. They've even managed to keep in most of the boss fights, and more importantly, the Macron for the final showdown. Though it does seem like this version is a lot tougher. I mean, his BFG attack this time around just seems to melt your asshole in nanoseconds. It's just for memory reasons, a lot of these environments are split down into much smaller chunks, and when you're backtracking through these units, you'll be staring at loading screens every 10 seconds. Manual saves still aren't a thing here, but instead you get save points at every major level transition, and you can abuse this as much as you want for unlimited saves, you know, if you can be bothered.
You are one pathetic loser.
Then if you die at any time, you've got to reload from your last save file, even able to resupply and get full health and ammo if your last save file left you with your proverbial pants down. There's minor gameplay modifications too, with items now being instant use. This, I think, is probably due to the limitations of the... Yeah, much of a huge deal, because... 2, I forget anyway. And then, whereas 64 took enemies away, Quake 2 on the PlayStation 1 actually adds them in, with the new enemies, the Arachnid and the Guardian. Is about the closest we'll ever get to in a able to soak up 1,000 points of damage as a commander, and the second toughest of all the non-boss enemies. Yeah, shit. In your rope mill, attack. You don't encounter them too often here, but you're going to remember every single instance because they're a pain in the ass. The other enemy is the Guardian, which is an entirely new boss fight, and this thing looks like Ed 209 from Robocop and is able to soak up 2,500 points of damage, making it the second toughest enemy in the entire game aside from Macron. Much like Quake 2 on the Nintendo 64, this is just a shorter compressed version of the base game, but I don't think that's a bad thing because, again, to me, it really seems to be a game that's aimed at people who didn't have the means to play it on the PC. I don't think you can say that one version is better than the other because they both play to their strengths here, and there's so much that they both do uniquely that it's not fair to write either one of them off. I think the PlayStation 1 version definitely looks and controls the best, only because you can't compare aiming with a controller to aiming with a mouse because the controller's going to lose almost every single time. Plus, it's also added in a bunch of little visual effects like a lens flare effect, which is kind of charming in how bad it is. You know what, with both versions, I'd still argue that they're up there as the absolute best of the best when it comes to the first-person shooters on their respective platforms. I just hope when Night Dive Studios get around to eventually remastering Quake 2, because let's be honest, that's going to happen, that they're able to include playable versions of both of these ports, like what they did with Quake 64. I think over time people are going to eventually come around and give Quake 2 the credit it deserves. I mean, there's so much revisionism on the internet these days that it's bound to happen. Just remember though that when that day finally comes and everyone on Twitter is suddenly a fan of this thing, that it was me, poor old G-Man Lives, who was one of the first ones to raise a flag here and fight in the game's defense. Now, if we could all just get everyone on the same page with Quake 4, then the stars would truly be aligned. Right, so thanks for sticking around, and now that I've got your attention, let me tell you about 32 gig 70 also comes with all the 30 series. You bust off. Makes sense.
Hello, YouTube. I just found
blow through a few ladder hatches and get deep into some loot. I got some explosive ammo, which I'll get. I'll grab it. I'll take 95. That's fine.
There's some in this box too.
I made 10 hollows.
Bottom middle. Back.
And they're all gone.
You made what?
This is no big deal. I made 10 hollows and they're all gone, which isn't a big deal. Not. Yeah, they are. They are. They seriously are. And it ain't a big deal because I can make.
Hello, YouTube. I just found out about these gravestones in this random place in San Fierro that say RIP Opposition 1997 to 2004 on it. which is the Driver series, which is quite funny. I know they made jokes position 1997 YouTube. I just found out about these gravestones in this random place in San Fierro that say RIP Opposition 1997 to 2004 on it, which is the Driver series, which is quite funny. I know they made jokes about the Driver series in the games a lot, but I didn't know these gravestones were here lamenting its death. That's quite funny. But yeah, hi, it's time for another one run. I'm going to play random missions made by people using the Design Your Mission mod and upload it to their website. I'm using a mod that like downloads a mission randomly, and then I'm going to try to speedrun them. I've got an hour to see how many I can beat. My best run so far was 15 missions in 1 hour, but that was like absolutely insane. So I probably won't beat that, but it doesn't matter. It's fun regardless of how many missions I beat. It's always a good laugh. Yeah, that's it, I guess. Oh, and if you're watching this, I may or may not be at ESA. I may have already come back and uploaded the ESA run to my YouTube channel. I don't know. Actually, will I upload it to my channel? I'm not sure. Look out for the ESA run. Either it's going to happen or it hasn't happened yet. Oops. You can climb these trees? Wait, what? How did I even... What? Wait, hold on, I'm delaying the YouTube video. You can climb these trees? How did I do that? I wasn't paying any attention at all. I was just like fucking memorizing the YouTube intro, and then I just climbed this tree. Okay, whatever, we're going. This is one YouTube intro. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. How did I climb the tree? I didn't know there were climbable objects. Alright, where are we? Oh, this looks... We're clawed, apparently. Internal Affair, CIA in LV Day 5. Enter LVPD and meet with CIA Sergeant Ms. MM Teaser. What the fuck? This one? CSG, yeah, she is right now with LVBT Chief, or your left, something, I don't know, on my left, I think he said. Here. Why am I just clawed? Try to understand, we have no option here. Oh god, but I'm not, so be careful, watch your... Oh, is they running while you were just now, need to talk with, okay. What is... Okay, right, something about the Dragon's Casino. Okay, I'll go to the Dragon's Casino. What was that? Okay. The text was so fast, how was anyone supposed to read that? I'm like native English and I couldn't read it. Imagine not being native English. Okay. Yeah, I guess it's a part 5 or something. For some reason I'm clawed, but I'm also a police officer. I don't know, man. We're going. Do speed run a cutscene. I mean, yeah, I suppose I can't really complain. It was pretty speedy. Alright, let's see how fast these cutscenes are. Reading is fast, reading aloud is not. Yeah, okay, sure, I guess. Uzi is a successful casino businessman, so you have, you threaten me, you have, oh, what? No, okay, you can't tell me, even in your head, you did not read that in time. Right? Even in your fucking head, you did not read that in time. No way. You have to, like, pause the video and watch it. Okay, whatever, I'm going back. Oh, the other casino, okay. Oopsie, I did not turn right enough. Sorry, I didn't look this time. Yeah. A lawyer, long history. First time I ever said to you now, very much seek go, but I'm not sure. CAC military fuels. I think Major R.R. Robin. The YouTube viewers can summarize the story. What is happening? Okay, I guess this is the big. I hate how it's just using places that are used all the time, though. Oh fuck. What a mission, PB pace. I mean, even the cutscenes are fast. I'm still doing a lot of pointless driving around. I don't know. I don't think this is that fast. Is that okay? Yeah, just... Yep, okay. This is just that one mission where you do this, right? Hey, what are you doing here? Unit, shoot him. Hold on, sir, we need to talk. Okay, then take this as a gift. What? What? Huh? What is happening? Where am I going now? Is it the airstrip? Oh, right. Oh my god, it's the other side of the map. It's the other side of the map, because of course it is. I mean, I guess I did just complain that it's only using places that are always used for stuff. Now they're using a place that isn't used to anything in the main game, so I guess I can't complain. Yeah, at least it is a speedy vehicle, yeah. I mean, I would have preferred a Hydra, obviously, but that's like maybe the only thing I would have preferred it to, so I guess it's like the second best thing. Oh dear. Time left. Oh, there's a time limit even, I didn't even see that. Okay. Good design equal map long drive, of course, yeah. Yeah, people seem to love their really long drives. What is the longest drive you do in a GTA SA regular mission? Like, what's the longest drive? I'm trying to think. Like, required drive. I guess photo opportunity? Lure? Maybe lure. And both those missions are fucking dogshit, right? So... Oh, NOE is pretty long as well, yeah. Monster? Okay, but the races count, though. Marathon? Yeah, but that's not in the story. Mission passed. Corrupt CIA agent unable to run with documents, so must be inside boat training center office. Okay. Oh, well, shit, whatever. I thought I was a bit more forwards than that. Wrong side of the tracks. Oh, no. Oh, hello. Oh, I have a lot of sniper ammo. Oh, okay, sure. It's just mission passed, okay. Wow, my respect is off the charts, though. At least I didn't have to go back. Yeah, it's a good thing I didn't, because I did just yeet the fucking hunter into the water, didn't I? There was even a helipad there. What was I doing? Oh, whatever. If I did have to go back, I would have been really screwed. Well, thankfully I didn't. Next. We're in Angel Pine. FBI Operozine Drogger. Wait, I just realised, did I get a single non-English mission last run? I don't think I did. Right? Every single mission I did was English last run. Huh. Yeah, this is the first non-English thing today. Interesting. Okay, okay. Objective O. I'm dead. Okay, so there are men with M4s. Is that a skip? Yeah, we'll see. But I don't even have full health. Why are there so many T-bones? Okay. Porter. Oh god! I was simply reading the non-English. Oh fuck. Okay, I gotta pay attention. Right? Oh, there's loads of them. Oh my god, there's so many of them. I'm gonna die. What is happening? Why am I shooting T-Bone? They also have guns. Why do they also have guns? Oh, for fuck's sake. Yeah, no, this is a skip. Fuck this. Nope. Don't know what's happening in that one, but it ain't fast. Alright, next. Welcome home. Oh god, what is this gonna be? Hey, homies. Look who I found hanging around, homies. Smoke. How are you alive? How's Ryder alive? It's a long story. Yeah, it really is. It's just loud shots and banging outside. Only opening bracket, no closing it. What the hell that? What the hell is that? Only one way to find out. Why did I miss the what? Get out of the house. You're surrounded. Okay. We're not gonna surrender, assholes. Why did we come out of the house? Fine, we have no choice but to kill you then. What the fuck? Bring on, bitch. What is happening? Did they like, helly, yeah, bitches? Oh, I'm Ryder. Why am I Ryder? Of all of them, okay. How about, okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna stand like way back here, and we're gonna shoot this. Good. Okay. Yeah, this is some fan fiction where it's like, they, at the end, they're like, oh, we're actually okay, lol, or whatever, right? Oh my word, they have so much health. Run him over. Oh, seriously, ambulance, you couldn't have ran him over. Guys, shoot him! I'm relying on you here. Just kill them. Just kill. There's like one left. Can you just... Did we win? Is that mission passed? Ha, arseholes. I was wearing body protection. Get ready to die. What? Luckily, I got reinforcements. Okay. None of them are headshotable. This is the worst part. At least I'm not getting warning stars. They did disable that. Well, that's good. Looks accidentally reloaded manually like I was. Sorry, automatically. Ah, I did it again, shit. Do I win now? Any last words, prick? What the fuck? Go to hell. Okay. Dies. Okay. That's the true ending of San Andreas, guys. That's the true ending. That's how the game should have ended. Fuck me. Alright, next. The DE secret ending, yeah. Get Psycho. 23, 2010, 15 PM. No, man, I have nothing to do with this shit. Don't kill me, I will give you money, bitches, anything. Sorry, but I don't give a damn. Oh, Logan. Oh, shit. That's it, fuck this, I'm gone. Okay. You can't escape me, wanker. Oh, shit, it was made by a British guy in 2010. Or a British kid, probably more likely. Help, help, he's going to kill me. Just shoot him. What? Oh, you worthless piece of shit, you don't deserve to live. Fucking hell. Oh my god, someone call the ambulance and call the police. Oh, 10 minutes later. Why did we need a fade out for it? Okay. He's still alive, but barely. I don't know if he can live any or. Nothing to see here, people. Get lost. No, fuck you. No, your mother's a hole. What the fuck is happening? Logan Fincher, get down here with your hands up, or we'll send SWAT after you. You... The bracket. Why is the bracket all the way over there? What is in his face? What is happening? How would he be alive? Is there any gameplay? You're in prison, Holmes. Who said that? Oh my god, it's Caesar. Wake up, Holmes. The name's Caesar Lest, and you're in prison. What do you mean I'm in prison? What is with his face? Oh my god, it crashed. Okay, well. Oh my god, why did it open like a tiny resolution? What the fuck? Game. Please. Alright, well, I guess we'll never get to know what happens after. Oh no. Girls versus workers. What? Stints to F9 just to auto. Why do I have 1 second left? What? Well, God, I'm like panicking now. I don't have any time. What is happening? Do I... Okay. Yep. Was it press F9 to get in the car? Is that what it said? F9? Where is this guy? Prati Krunu. What? I'm back in the car. Follow back? What? 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 No! No! What the fuck? Skip. Intentado terroriosta. Oh god. Varfalo com chiefita gang elitum trabolo something. I don't know. You, vehicle. Yep. Yeah, you do. Don't any other guns. Why is it always a deagle? I feel like I get a deagle a lot. Okay, whatever, we're going. Okay, down here.